I've just had such a, frankly, wonderful and educational time reading your book.
Oh, great.
And a lot of what I've been reading in there is kind of, I think, highly applicable to a lot of what we're seeing happening in the world as we speak. Before we go into sort of all the details of your book, I want to talk a little bit about current events because, again, I feel like you're going to have a very interesting vantage point on a few points. Okay, first of all, the Chinese interest in seeming interest in Afghanistan right now, as the U.S. has withdrawn. We're hearing that they're thinking about running Bagram Air Base. We're hearing that the Taliban is saying that China's going to fund them. Aside from, I suppose, the propaganda victory here, what is the significance?
It's a mixed bag for China. There is a propaganda victory here, and they are milking it for that. But, let's not forget that all of this program that they've had to kind of redo the Uyghurs in Xinjiang arises out of their fear of Islamic nationalism. And I think that there's some nervousness in Beijing about, oh, wow, the Americans are now out of Afghanistan. That kind of opens it up for the Taliban and other similar types in the Muslim community to make trouble for China. So on the surface, they are playing it as a great defeat for America and a positive result for China. But I think internally, I don't think that they believe that.
Fascinating. So what do you expect they will do at this point? Because right now it's just all basically rumors
Yeah.
and statements.
Actually, I don't think that they're going to do a lot. They're probably, I guess, I wouldn't be surprised, if there's some announcement of a Belt and Road project, and China will put up $50 billion or something like that. But I think it'll be a long time before you see the $50 billion. And I think that, again, because it's not just China involved here, but Russia is involved here, and of course Pakistan. And Pakistan has an internally contradictory role. On the one hand, they have propagated or given refuge to the Taliban, but on the other hand, the Pakistan itself is divided, and they don't want to lose control. So I think it actually creates a lot of complications, and I don't see that there. Aside from the propaganda piece of it, which is going to disappear quickly, I don't see that there's any great gain for China.
Interesting.
I think it could complicate China's life.
So let's jump to another headline, which I'm sure you're very aware of. This is basically, I'll read it to you. Beijing demands U.S. fulfill wish list in exchange for cooperation on climate change.
Right. This is so interesting, isn't it? Huh? That here's China, the biggest emitter globally, double America's emissions, and China is saying, well, we can't do anything about that unless you Americans talk more nicely to us and respond to our ridiculous requests, our demands from you. So I think this is a revelation, I think an unwitting revelation by China of its true self. Effectively, it's not honest. Effectively, it doesn't give a damn about emissions. What it gives a damn about is maintaining the power of the Chinese Communist Party. And it has revealed that in that kind of reaction.
And it's very interesting. What comes through in your book is, to me, probably a central point is how important the supremacy of the party is to the leadership and, frankly, to anything when anyone ever does there, right?
Right. Well, I think that it's important for people in the West to try to get a grasp of what the extent and intent of the Chinese Communist Party is. We say Chinese Communist Party, but in this context, we could really say a Communist Party, or we could say a Leninist Party, because actually the Chinese Communist Party doesn't really exhort so much communism, but it is purely Leninist. And what's the difference? And the point here is that Lenin established a model for governing in which complete power is concentrated in the hands of a very few people who are the party. And the characteristic of a Leninist party is one that it seeks to control everything in a few, very narrowly, in a very few hands. And secondly, it's paranoid. It's constantly looking, because it itself is suspicious, and because it knows that it itself would cheat and scratch and bite and kick. It assumes everybody else does too. And so it's always looking around for some small deviation that it has to stamp out in order to maintain its power and control. So it's a paranoid party, number one. Number two, that means that it has to survey constantly at what's going on in every element of the society. Be it medicine or arts or engineering or whatever it is, the party has to know what's going on and surveil that and be sure that there's no threat to the party there. And you see that in what is developing in China with surveillance and using artificial intelligence to track people and social scores and so forth. That grows out of this paranoia of the party. And then I think that if the president, imagine that the president of the United States appointed every governor of every state, every mayor of every city, every CEO of every major corporation. Imagine that the Army, the United States Army, is not the United States Army, but it's let's say, the Democratic Party or the Republican Party Army. And so that's very important, because when people talk about the PLA, the People's Liberation Army, most people in the West think this is the Chinese army. It is not. The army is an arm of the party. The army does not defend the country. It defends the party. And so imagine that the President of the United States has his own army, and he names every important person in the country. That's what Xi Jinping does. And that's we talk about the President of the United States being the most powerful man in the world. He's not, not by a long shot. Xi Jinping is. It's absolutely critical for people in the West to understand that. And because of that concentration of power, what it means is that the holder of the power, in this case we think Xi Jinping or the Politburo, but the few top leaders of the Chinese Communist Party have a program. And they have a complete strategy. And so they're thinking about, okay, what is the party, what is our technology strategy, what is our military strategy, what is our welfare strategy? They have a completely coordinated strategy across the board, and nothing is being left to chance. And this is so alien to the West, and particularly to the individualistic United States, that it's very hard for us to grasp. But if we don't grasp that, we can't adequately respond to the challenge that China poses.
Well, it's something that you mentioned, which is even less intuitive, or maybe the least intuitive, I would argue, is this idea that she plays a central role in choosing the CEOs of all the major corporations.
Right.
So is that really true?
Well, think about it. A third of the Chinese GDP is generated by state-owned corporations. And the heads of the state-owned corporations are directly named by the party. So already he's naming at least a third of the major CEOs.
And those are the massive companies, obviously.
Yeah, right. Yeah, those are the huge state-owned things, and they're spread all over the world. I mean, the port of Piraeus in Greece, several of the ports in Australia are run or owned by state-owned Chinese corporations. Half of the pipelines in Australia are run and owned by state-owned Chinese corporations. So these are very, very big and important operators. So probably the Chinese businessman who's most well-known is Jack Ma of Alibaba. Now, Jack, give him credit, he is an entrepreneur, and he did start Alibaba, and he built the company, and he wasn't named by the party. But Jack got to the point where he thought that he could criticize the party. He thought that he could be critical of the regulatory system that was being imposed. And Xi Jinping just cut his legs off and cut him off at the knees. And Jack is now donating something like $15.5 billion